Welcome everyone. We are beginning our third class in this series, but we're actually going to be shifting a little bit to a new way of looking at our study of the Parsha and in the weeks ahead. And we're going to be looking at what I think is really the biggest question of this whole part of the Torah, which is who's going to carry on Abraham's path, right? Abraham creates this path. We've been studying about it. He's created a relationship with God, a way of being. Uh, and then now the whole rest of the book is really about what are the values that are needed to continue it and who's going to continue it. How is it going to be continued? How are we going to find those who will succeed him? Why does it go in this direction or the other? And the whole rest of the book is really a succession story, and it's about spiritual succession. So it's different than reading the story of European kings who are all looking at a different kind of lens. But this is really who has what it takes to follow Abraham, and what are the values that are needed, the qualities that are needed, and the movement of all of it. And that's really the focus of all these stories. You go from patriarch to patriarch and matriarch, and it's all about who's going to continue Abraham's path, who's worthy to continue the path, and who can carry it and develop it, who has the wide enough spiritual shoulders and the good sense and the ability to transmit it to the next generation. And it's an interesting question because it's something that we still live with every generation. How are we going to continue? How are we going to continue this tradition and this path? How do we pass it on or not? Or who do we pass it on to? Or when does it get passed on? And it's a question that we have at every, but now it's not as important because there's many of us. But back then there was only one link, and that was the big question. So let us begin. We're going to start reading the beginning of our parsha. Anybody have any thoughts or questions before we begin?
When you say Abraham's path, what specifically are you speaking about? Do you have an idea of what that path is?
Well, Abraham's path, right? God begins by saying, leave everything you know to go and become a blessing, and all those who will know you will be blessed, all those who curse you will be cursed. Go to a specific land, and right, go to yourself, lech lecha, go to yourself. And so Abraham goes through a whole journey, and it's not a theological journey, right? We think of journeys as being theological, but Abraham's journey is very experiential. God appears to him at certain moments and directs him in certain specific ways how to be, and then gives him a blessing, makes him from being Abram to Abraham. And so it's the way our tradition looks at it. First of all, monotheism, right? Because he's following one God, everybody else is following multiple gods. And our God was El Elyon, the highest God or the high God. So Abraham's path is unique in the sense that he's trying to follow the words of one God in one land, and that God is asking of him to have a certain moral and ethical considerations to how he's living. And if we look at the context of everyone else living at that time, there was a lot of idolatry. There was the practice of throwing your children into fires for Moloch. There was, cultic practices that we'd find quite shocking in our days, and so the way it's described is they had a certain kind of hypnotic draw to them, right? You would the way they worshipped in those days, not what Abraham was doing, what others were doing, was very hypnotic, and you'd easily be drawn to it. So he was going against the grain. So it was very hard to go against the grain. You'd walk by a temple to the other gods, and they were doing all kinds of strange dances music and sacrificing people and children and having orgies and all kinds of things, and people were drawn to it. And Abraham was trying to live a different kind of way, and it was not easy because everybody else was they're having, not that they weren't allowed to have a good time, but everybody else was having a really good time, and their religion was hypnotic and wild, and that's the way it's portrayed, at least, right, throughout the Torah. And it was a path of self-inquiry, find out who you
Well, it's
are.
mostly introspective, isn't it? With the Lech Lecha,
Uh-huh.
that isn't the path. I would say the path is only introspective, with experience in the world as a help to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Everything that's happening in the world was an aid to that introspection. And there's a solitary path, right? The very first calling to Abraham is go to yourself and leave your father's house and your land. And eventually, the Jewish path is not associated with being a solitary path. But the way it begins is a solitary path, an introspective path, and also a very demanding path, right? God is always there looking over Abraham's shoulder and saying, what's going on over there? What are you doing? And sending these tests. It wasn't just go out and do what you do. It was looking over your shoulder kind of path. So that's a hard thing to carry, and to transmit, and to find the right people to carry that from generation to generation. And how do you do that? And what are the important features of it? Okay. Returning to our Parsha, Chaye Sarah. Alan, would you please read for us?
Chaye Sarah. Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life, came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead, and spoke to the Hittites, saying, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you, that I may remove my dead for burial. And the Hittites replied to Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my Lord. You are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. Thereupon Abraham bowed low to the landowning citizens, the Hittites, and he said to them, If it is your wish that I remove my dead for burial, you must agree to intercede for me with Ephron, son of Zohar. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at the full price for a burial site in your midst. Ephron was present among the Hittites. So Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, the assembly in his town's gate, saying, No, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed low before the landowning citizens and spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the landowning citizens, saying, If only you would hear me out, let me pay the price of the land. Accept it from me that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying to him, My Lord, do hear me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go and bury your dead. Abraham accepted Ephron's terms, Abraham paid out to Ephron the money that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate. So Ephron's land in Machpelah near Mamre, the field with its cave and all the trees anywhere within the confines of that field, passed to Abraham as his possession, in the presence of the Hittites, of the assembly in the town's gate. And then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site.
Okay, thank you. So why spend so much time with this whole negotiation and this whole story and all of this about Sarah and her burial and all this? What's your take?
It's a land transaction because Abraham is a stranger, right? He's not of Canaan. He's from Ur, or wherever it is, right? That he had to travel into this land. So he's actually a stranger in this land. The Hittites own this land. By making this negotiation for the cave and the field near Hebron, he's actually claiming a stake, and he's paying for the land in front of everybody, right? He's at the gates of this city. He's got all the land owning people there hearing this transaction and acknowledging it and legitimizing it. My guess is so that Sarah can lie there. I mean, and when you bury your dead, right? Cemeteries are a way of holding on to land through generations, right? I mean, to unbury dead who are buried on a land, that's a grave, that's a grave insult, right? You don't uproot people, you don't disturb burial land. So to me, this sounds like Abraham is putting down roots on this land, just outside of Hebron, so that he and his line can continue to claim this land forever and ever. That's how I'm looking at it. Nice.
So on one hand, it's claiming land, and any land. But on the other hand, it's for a specific purpose, which is the burial of Sarah, and that they should know that place is Sarah, and eventually Abraham's burial place, acquired in this way.
And legally acquired, right? Because it's publicly proclaimed. There's a public negotiation. The owner of the land sets the price. It isn't like Abraham offers. I mean, Abraham offers to pay whatever the price is, and then the owner of the land says, well, what is 400? It's kind of an offhanded way, but he does name the price, and Abraham pays the price that is named for him. So it's a legal transaction.
There's a wonderful kind of Middle Eastern bartering going on here, right? In polite language.
What is 400 to me?
What is 400 for me? But that's a very high price, right? Now first he says, I'll give it to you for free. But Abraham says, how could I take it for free? And it's all the politeness. But in the end, Abraham pays a very full price. What's the impression of Abraham and Sarah from this?
Well, it sounds like they're highly respected because they're rich, right? Abraham's got all this sheep, all this cattle, all this gold, all this silver, all this gold. So he is a man of means. And it sounds like the Hittites respect that. What I didn't understand in this was when the Hittites say to him, your God, wait a minute, where is it?
It's right in front. I just put up in front.
Yeah.
Exactly what Shma'eni
Yeah.
Adoni.
You are the elect of God among us. How do they know that?
Mm-hmm.
How do they know that?
What do you think?
Well, if they do know that, that would then give them reason to respect Abraham and to sell him this land. But I'm not sure how they know that. I mean, who told them that he was the elect of God? How do they know that? I'm not quite sure.
So he must have a good reputation, right? You have to have a good reputation to have that. But so in the earlier chapter, the few chapters before, another non-Jewish leader of the area, Avimelech, tells Abraham, right,
Well,
God is with you in everything you do. And the commentators say, well, how did he know? He said, well, he watched Abraham walk out of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed, and he was alive, and they saw him be victorious over the 5 kings in the big war earlier. And so others say that, others commentators in that particular comment say, well, there was a feeling, they could feel God with Abraham. They could feel that this was a man of God, and they feared him. They didn't fear him as a person, but they feared the presence that was with him. So there was something special that you felt being in his presence. And so so whether it was by reputation and by his actions or by just his presence, Abraham had something going for him. What else is all of this? What about Sarah? What does this tell us about Sarah?
not a lot.
Well,
Not a lot.
his dead body, it sounds to me, also has some significance to it, and the fact that it's going to be buried in a cave. I wonder, is a cave a more auspicious place to bury somebody than under the ground? Well, what's the significance of the cave here? Why a cave rather than or maybe that was the usual place to bury?
It was a good burial place, right? And I mean, according this again is later tradition, but this cave was the cave that's the entranceway to the Garden of Eden, and kind of a mystical. It's the best place to be buried. But I mean, it's clearly he's honoring Sarah and himself. He doesn't say this is where he's going to be buried later, but it is. But he's clear. I mean, all of this is really about honoring Sarah, right? All of this whole negotiation is about him wanting to honor his wife in the best way and being willing to pay top dollar for it, and going through this very public process to do so. Does anybody else sense a little bit of danger to Abraham going through this? I've always felt there's a bit of danger to Abraham. It's even though it's all very polite, but underneath the surface, he's so polite and so willing. You wonder that maybe this was not an easy transaction to be made, right? They could have. He's surrounded by essentially, neighbors, but he's going out of his way to bow low to them, right? How many times does he bow low, and does he call them my Lord? And one gets a sense that he's asking for something that's not small of them. He's asking for. I mean, first of all, to have a presence in their land, as we were saying, that would go on and on.
I think that's true. I think both sides are acting with formality and circumspection. Yes, and I see that Alter cites the writer, scholar Meir Sternberg, who covered the ins and outs of the transaction. But so when he says, the Prince of God, or whatever that means, that phrase, the Hittites are saying, are being very gracious too. It's not necessarily that they think he's a special a delegate of some higher being, but they're very, very careful back and forth. And so who is it who says it? Who is it who says, what is the 400 shekels? Is that Ephron?
It's Ephron who says this.
Ephron,
Once they summon Ephron to the negotiation.
Thank you. Yes.
And
when
he
he says
present, he comes forward into the negotiations. Yeah.
Yes, it comes right out. Yeah. That is such a great line. What's it between us, what's 400 shekels and 13 cents, among us,
So he says
paid in silver.
But first, what does he say? First, Ephron says, I give you the field, I give you the cave.
Right.
Give it you in the presence of my people, bury your dead. And he bows, but Abraham bows low and says, no, 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 if only you would hear me out, right? Let me pay the price of the land, accept it, I may bury my dead there. And he says, no, he says, okay, well, do hear me, a piece of land. So it's extremely cautious and polite and gracious, which I've always felt has a feeling a little bit of the extreme caution of danger. They're both being very careful because nobody wants to insult the other and everybody wants to do what is right.
But they also want to, I think that's true, they also want to establish their position. And if Abraham just says, he actually said, okay, I take it, and in the future I'll be kind to you, that would be terrible. And
he wants his claim.
He wants the claim, as Nancy was saying before. He wants the legal possession. Whatever law they have in common, he understands it. They understand it. And it's a public act. I think Nancy said that.
It's very interesting that in some ways, even this is in the most concrete form talking about Abraham's inheritance, right? This is where he's buried. It's the place where eventually, we can imagine even back then, though we don't know, that there was a custom of visiting the burial places, and it's setting him and his progeny in the land, right? And he's doing it in the most proper, respectful, and deliberate way possible within the eyes of all the locals. And they're accepting him in their midst, right? This is them accepting him and his people, his wife, in their midst. And the Torah is marking it very deliberately also. And it's very interesting coming within all these stories, as I was saying, of talking about his spiritual succession, or those who will come after him, both physically and spiritually. Also, there's the land is also being marked in this sense as a reflection of that.
Yeah, Hebron's in Judah, isn't it? Isn't Hebron one of David's
sure.
cities? Yeah.
Hebron is the capital of Judah, right? Hebron is where David establishes the beginning, and to this day, right? Hebron is the in some ways the centerpiece of the whole conflict, and Hebron is in some ways the most tragic place in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because the Jewish presence, without getting into politics, the Jewish presence there is very difficult, and the way the Jews and Israelis who choose to live in Hebron are the ones in some ways who are the most extreme, and the whole Baruch Goldstein episode, terror attack. But as an adult, I've only been to Hebron once, but you go there and it feels like the center of all of it, the conflict, but it's also where Abraham and Sarah buried, and it feels like that. When you go to the burial site of Abraham and Sarah, it feels very powerful. I've always felt it to be very spiritually powerful. You go there and wow, this is where the Jewish people began, and there are other places where much later, but that's and the structure around the Machpelah is thousands of years old. It's very it's very, and there's always, Jerusalem is right to become the main Jewish holy city, but Hebron is even older. Hebron is the bones of the Jewish people, and yet it's the center of the conflict, and there's a good chance the Jews will have to leave Hebron, because God willing, there'll be a political settlement. But anyway, let's not get into politics, but it's a very, very, very powerful place. Let's move on. And actually, let's look at a few commentaries before we move on. Let's see. I have to pull up the right file. Okay. So these are the questions that I set at the beginning of this. Why is Sarah's burial given such importance? What is Sarah's place within the tradition? Why does this? And then we'll go into the story of Rebecca. So this is Rashi on the years of Sarah's life, because it has this peculiar expression of the years of Sarah's life are 120. So the word years is repeated and without a number to indicate that they were all equally good. So there's something of, even though we don't find out a lot about Sarah, she's being honored here through this whole passage, right? This whole passage honors Sarah in a way. And I wanted to mark that importantly, because this whole parsha in some ways is about honoring the matriarchs of Judaism, right? So now we turn to Chizkuni, a prince of God. Somebody read this for us, please. Nancy, would you mind reading this?
Chizkuni, prince of God. They answered his first statement first, when he had described his status as either that of a stranger resident, by saying that he was much more than that. They considered him as if God himself had sent him. As far as his second request was concerned, that he needed to acquire ancestral rights to any burial plot, so as to safeguard it to being plowed over in the future by its previous owner, every one of them would be willing to deed him the plot that he had already chosen for himself, his own future burial plot. He should meanwhile proceed to bury his dead, and they would consider it an honor to have Sarah buried in a plot that had once belonged to one of them. Even if Abraham, by chance, would select a plot that one of them had already earmarked as his own future burial ground.
So it's talking about the honor given to Abraham and Sarah by them, right? As has been pointed out by that phrase. And I think, and the last point is interesting, right? He might be asking for a plot that they'd already picked for themselves. I mean, this is the best plot, right? He didn't pick the little tucked away plot. He picked the best place, and yet they're willing to give it to him because of his status. And Nancy, would you mind reading?
It arose, Radak says, it arose for Avram as a purchase and acquisition. The unusual sounding word here, what is that word?
Come, to arise. It's the way it describes when he actually purchases it. Go ahead.
The unusual sounding word kam here also occurs in this sense in Leviticus 27:19, where it describes the legal procedure of redeeming property from the temple treasurer by paying a premium. The term is chosen to describe a transaction of a permanent, enduring nature.
He rose about, right? There's a symbolic. He rose to take possession of it. The whole passage comes together as this is something of importance, of time, of great time. This is something that will last for a long time. It's done in the proper manner. And then let's finally read Ramban. Nancy, if you mind continuing, please.
Rambam says, this section was written to inform us of God's kindness to Abraham, that is, in the land in which he came to live, he was regarded as a prince of God. See above verse 6. And each individual, as well as all the people, called him my Lord, although he did not tell them that he was a prince and a great man. Also, in his lifetime, God fulfilled his promise to him, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Same place. Moreover, his wife died and was buried in the inheritance of the eternal, 1 Samuel 26:19, a reference to the land of Israel. Further, Scripture wanted to inform us of the place of the burial of the patriarchs, since we are obligated to honor the burial place of our holy ancestors. Our rabbi said, Sanhedrin 11a, 111a, that this also was one of the trials of Abraham. He desired a place to bury Sarah, but did not find it until he purchased it, despite God's promise that the entire land would be given to him.
So all of these to say that there was this was an important moment where we really see Abraham's time in the land has come to some fruition and borne fruit. And Abraham is a man of note, a man of importance, and he has something to give, right? He's achieved some of that mission that God's given him. And now we're going to turn to the next part, really the rest of the book of Genesis, which is how are we going to always ensure the succession of Abraham from generation to generation, and the continuing of this inheritance. So let's go back.
Excuse me,
Go ahead.
they talk about the field,
Yes.
but in all the commentaries, but they're not mentioning the cave. Now, the cave would be a much safer place to have Sarah buried, but they don't mention the cave.
Mm-hmm. Well, the cave comes with the field. So the
Right.
custom back then was to be buried in the cave, and so I guess the fact that he bought the land around it too is showing even more that sense of permanence on the land.
44.
Go ahead, Phil.
It does refer, if I may, to the cave explicitly in that recitation in verse 17, the field and the cave and all the trees. It's, and as has been, as Alter says, others have said, it's very much a legalistic description of the deed.
Mm-hmm.
It even
Yeah.
uses the word purchase at the end of it, mikneh, as a possession, to something that you buy. And so it is laid out. Even the trees, which I don't think were mentioned. I don't think the trees were mentioned before, but you get the land and the improvements thereon and the everything.
Mm-hmm. It's very legalistic, and it makes it very clear where it is, right? And then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and. Right, it says with its cave and all the trees, right? Field with its cave and all the trees, anywhere within the confines of that field, past Abraham. So, right, it's to this day, you can look and see, well, where is this cave and which is a field, and you can go and try and think what it might have been. So there's it is a very legalistic text, yeah. And actually, that verb, as you were saying, to acquire becomes very, very important in throughout Jewish legal law for a mikneh, liknot, to purchase, and how when a purchase is completed and what it means to purchase. And yeah, actually, it's very much a biblical idea too, right? Because what we're about to see turning now to finding a wife for Isaac, and how she's, so to speak, acquired also for the family, and the symbols of that. So let's read on, chapter 24. Who would like to read for us?
Well, I can do it. Abraham is now old, advanced in years, and Adonai had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to the senior servant of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, "Put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by Adonai, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to the land of my birth and get a wife for my son Isaac. And the servant said to him, what if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham answered him, on no account must you take my son back there. Adonai, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from my native land, who promised me on oath, saying, I will assign this land to your offspring, will send a messenger before you, and you will get a wife for my son from there. And if the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of this oath to me, but do not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore to him as bidden.
Okay. So what is the concern here? What is Abraham worried about?
Well, he's advanced in years and he wants to have Isaac settled maybe before he dies.
Extend the family, continue the line.
Yes.
This is still about the land, though, isn't it? This is still very much about the land. If Abraham leaves the land, then he may lose his claim on the land. Even though he's paid for the cave and the field, he's still got all of his animals and his family, and he is inhabiting this land, which was promised, right? But I think it sounds to me like he's afraid to leave the land, and he doesn't want Isaac to leave the land either, because Isaac is his heir. And if his heir leaves the land, then there might be a fight, or there might be a conflict over whose land it really is. I think Abraham is trying very hard to hold on to the land, and that means his heir Isaac has to be on the land. And that's why he sends a servant to get Isaac's wife and bring Isaac's wife back, so Isaac never has to leave the land, and there's no conflict over who owns this land.
But the other thing is that his son is not supposed to take a wife from around him, from the place that they live in at the moment. And this sort of has an aroma of early signs of what might count as incest, actually. That you have to travel at a distance from your household to be able to find a wife. You don't find somebody within your household. And then this gets sort of formalized later on in the Torah. But I think this is sort of it has an incestual feel to me, that he has to leave.
No, well, he's
The wife has to come.
His cousins?
well, he is sending her. He is sending her back. He's sending her back to where he comes from. I mean, the basic premise is this, right? The basic premise is he's concerned about whom Isaac will marry, right? That's the basic premise. And he has this oath that he's given to God, and that God has given to him a covenant, and he wants the covenant to continue. And he's concerned if Isaac goes out to find, first of all, he wants Isaac to marry someone whom he thinks will be suitable for him, right? And he doesn't think the local Canaanites will be suitable for him. And so he wants to go back to where he came from, where I guess people were more along the lines that Abraham thought were suitable for Isaac, whether it was a custom or whether it was because of their character or their nature. And he's willing to go to great effort to ensure that it happens, right? It would have been a lot easier to give Isaac one of the Canaanites to him. That way he didn't have to send Eliezer far away to do it. But this is very important to him. And for the continuation of what God is giving him, both the physical inheritance of being on the physical land and the spiritual inheritance, which is continuing the covenant, what God is giving to him. And this is this is his primary concern as he's becoming old. And he doesn't seem to trust anyone else to do this properly. Like this seems to be a moment of danger, right? It could go wrong in many ways. That's, not only could he not take a wife from among his own extended family, but he could also Isaac could go there himself and get stuck there, and that would jeopardize, the future. So this is a moment of danger for Abraham, and for what will continue, and who maybe also it's important who you marry, right? For the continuation, because if he marries one of the Canaanites, what could happen to the spiritual inheritance? It could easily be gone pretty quickly. And if Isaac goes and meets somebody in Ur Kasdim, maybe he doesn't come back, and then the inheritance is gone too. So this is really a hard, a difficult moment, and he goes to this important oath that he makes his most trusted servant, right, the senior servant, take. He doesn't send anybody. He sends the most important servant, and the transmission is very, very important and has to happen in this very specific way, right? And let's see what the commentators say. This is Radak. Let me read the Radak, please. It says he was coming along in his years. Nancy, do you mind reading this too?
I see or
Just above. Do you see just above?
Oh, yeah. The years when man thinks about his departure from this earth and is concerned to make sure that his son or children are safely married while he is still around.
And go ahead too, please.
Okay, or HaChaim. The reason Eliezer had to proceed in this order was that he feared Abraham's family might deceive him and try and palm off.
This is from the next continuation. So actually, before we read this, we'll read the continuation of the story in the Torah. Bonnie, do you mind continuing, please? We're going to continue the story. We stopped off after he is ready to go. He's made the oath.
No, here, 10.
10, yeah.
Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and set out, taking with him all the bounty of his master, and he made his way to Aram Naharaim, to the city of Nahor. He made the camels kneel down by the well outside the city at evening time, the time when women come out to draw water. And he said, Adonai, God of my master Abraham's house, grant me good fortune this day and deal graciously with my master Abraham. Here I stand by the spring as the daughters of the townspeople come out to draw water. Let the maiden to whom I say, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink, and I will also water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have decreed for your servant Isaac. Thereby shall I know that you have dealt graciously with my master. He had scarcely finished speaking when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The maiden was very beautiful and a virgin, no man having known her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. The servant ran toward her and said, please let me sip a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. When she had let him drink his fill, she said, I will also draw for your camels until they finish drinking. Quickly emptying her jar into the trough, she ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all the camels. The man, meanwhile, stood gazing at her, silently wondering whether Adonai had made his errand successful or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring weighing half a shekel and 2 gold bands for her arms, 10 shekels in weight. Pray tell me, he said, whose daughter are you? Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She replied, I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And she went on, there is plenty of straw and feed at home, and also room to spend the night. The man bowed low in homage to Adonai and said, Blessed be Adonai, the God of my master Abraham, who has not withheld steadfast faithfulness from my master. For I have been guided on my errand by Adonai to the house of my master's kin. The maiden ran and told all of this to her mother's household.
Okay, so we're going to stop here. And after this, it continues and everybody's excited and all the families are excited. They're here and they found each other. And very quickly, Rebecca heads back on the camel with all the riches are given to the family, and it's been made. So what's happening in this story? What's this whole, what is the Torah trying to show us with this moment of Eliezer making this little test for God, right? This little asking for omen, and the omen comes, and then all of this happens. What do you think of the omen that he asks for? What does he say? He says, here I stand, let the maiden who says, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink, and I will also water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have decreed for your servant Isaac.
Yeah. And then the perfect woman appears and does everything.
What makes her perfect?
She's generous with the water, and then includes the camels, and she's a virgin.
Yeah, exactly. And she's very beautiful too, right?
And she's beautiful.
Yeah.
And the family connection should be.
And the family connection as well.
It's in fact, I think she's Abraham. Correct me if I'm wrong. Abraham's father, brother's son's daughter. Father's brother was Nahor, and
Abraham's brother is Nahor. The wife of Abraham's brother.
His father's Terach's brother. What's it?
Nahor. No, Abraham had a brother Nahor. He has Terach. So Abraham's brother is Nahor.
Terach, yeah.
And the son, and she's a son.
She's a daughter of the son of
the son.
Right.
Bethuel is her father, and Bethuel is the nephew, is Abraham's nephew. So that would make
she'd be a great niece, wouldn't she?
Yeah, would make a great niece. So that means that Isaac and Rebecca are first cousins once removed.
Yes. Is it right? Been a long time since I've looked at this. This part, Ben Milka Eshet Nahor. So Bethuel. So Bethuel is the son of Milka and Nahor. It must be. I'm not sure why it doesn't say Ben Nahor. Here, let's go see if we have a little commentary on that. Because it seems a little bit strange. Okay. He was not the son of Reumah, the concubine. Exactly.
Yeah, the second wife, Abraham's second wife.
So it's no. So it's saying why does it not say that he was son of Nahor? Why does it say son of Bethuel? Because Nahor also had a concubine. So that's why. That's the strange thing in this sentence, right? Because it should have just said that he was the son of Nahor of Bethuel. Why does it say the son of Milcah?
Who's the wife?
Anyhow, but he's great. That's the most important part. And some of the commentators will say, he took a bit of a risk, saying, let the first woman, because what if it wasn't a family member who had given all the water? What do you have done then? What do you have done then? So it was a risky omen, and we do have, the Torah says not to use omen. So what is it about this? But yes, there's a whole argument about it. I don't think it's that interesting to go into it, but the omen gives a wonderful feeling that this is meant to be, right? That's what that creates, right? This is all meant to be. It's God's hand is helping precipitate the events. And even though it sounded like a very difficult task that was given to Eliezer to go find someone for Isaac far away, it happens with great ease, right? God wants this to happen. God facilitates this and makes it pretty much as easy as it can be, right? The sense is he arrives, and the moment he arrives, he asks for an omen. The moment he makes the omen, it happens perfectly. There's no question, right? There's no question about whether this is the right person, right? As Bonnie was saying, it's absolutely perfect, and you couldn't ask for more, right? From a future for the future daughter-in-law of his master, right? You couldn't ask for more than this. She's generous. I mean, try giving water to 10 camels. That's not an easy task, right? That's a big ask to give to a stranger, but she is generous and willing to do that. And there's all kinds of interesting comments from the commentaries, right? So he says, "Let me sip a little water," right? Me'at maim. He's very polite, right? And she doesn't say, "Here, take a little bit." She just says, "Drink, drink as much as you want." And she quickly lowers her jar, right? This is like Abraham himself, who lowers. He's the one who runs, who mahers to go for the strangers who we studied last week come to him, right? So she, in some ways, is mirroring Abraham's own nature of greeting strangers, right? And she has that hospitality, and he waits to see, is she going to do it for all my 10 camels, right? And she does. So it's really a very perfect moment. And of course, the drying of the water is very symbolic. I mean, this is the well is fertility, but it's also blessing. So in everything, this is a perfect moment for the future of the tribe.
73:48.
Okay, so let's. So Orach Chaim, Nancy, would you mind continuing to read a little bit the commentaries?
The reason Eliezer had to proceed in this order was that he feared Abraham's family might deceive him and try to palm off one of their maidservants on him, claiming that she was their family. He therefore stipulated that the girl to be regarded as suitable for Isaac should proceed to do more than he asked of her by also offering to water his camels. This would be characteristic of a girl who was related to Abraham. I'm not sure quite how. In fact, Rebecca described herself immediately as a daughter of Bethuel.
And please continue.
Okay, Rashi says, her thou has appointed. She is fit for him, since she will be charitable and will therefore be worthy of admission into the house of Abraham. The word
that's the rest is
okay.
all this is just grammar.
And
that
thou has shown kindness. If she is of his family and a fit companion for him, I shall know that thou hast shown kindness to my master.
Okay, and then she says, beginning, my Lord, drink, my Lord.
Drink, my Lord. Okay. Instead of letting Eliezer merely
just above, there's one just above.
Sorry. The Torah records this detail in order to tell us of Rivka's good manners. Although she did not know of the stranger's social status, she addressed him as my Lord. She was very prompt and actually let him drink directly from her hand. Yeah, I noticed that. He could have done this. Eliezer could have done this. But Rebecca is pouring it and offering her hand. So he's literally drinking from her hand. That's interesting too. Anyway, Or Haim says, she said, drink, my Lord, etc. Instead of letting Eliezer merely sip a little water, the girl offered that he drink freely as much as he wanted. She did not want him to have use of his hand to drink out of, but she lowered the jug to make it more convenient for him. The word, whatever it is, means that not only did Eliezer not have to lift the jug to his lips, but she placed it so that he did not even have to tilt it. She brought the jug to the level of his mouth.
Okay, and the last one we don't have to read. But so we have this wonderful two stories, really both about the two matriarchs, right? The first one is about Sarah and about giving her the honor of being buried correctly. And then we're finding the next matriarch, right? One matriarch has died, and so now we're looking for the next matriarch. And the Torah is showing the great concern it is to have a matriarch of worth and someone who also has the character to be able to continue on the tradition. And so the Torah is very concerned about passing on the tradition. And it's not only about the father, that the patriarch can marry whoever he wants, but the matriarch is also very important. The qualities are very important. And they note how much effort Abraham goes to find the right person for Isaac, in a sense of passing down the inheritance. Phil, you look like you're about to say something.
I just wanted to say, because it's a remarkable story. It shouldn't really necessarily be taken, you can believe it, but it doesn't necessarily be taken as an actual document of a historical transaction. And one evidence is that camels were unknown in Palestine or in Canaan at the time Abraham would have lived. So we have a very realistic account within a framework. That's all I wanted to say.
It's true. It's the stories are all feel very realistic, but there are details like the camels are anachronistic, and the camels were not yet domesticated yet in Canaan, and so of course the dating is all. What is the dating of such a story? But it's one of the elements that biblical scholars point to in the camel issue. All right.